Heritage Uncovered. I'm Clarissa Levi, Art and Heritage Counsel at Wedlake Bell.
And I'm Richard Harwood. I'm a barrister at 39 Essex Chambers.
We're joined this morning by Henry Berkeley of Spetchley Park Estate. Thanks so much for joining us, Henry. You are here this morning to talk about the renovation project at Spetchley Park. And I thought we would start by setting the scene. Your family owned Spetchley Park for many years. Can you tell us about the history of the house?
Yes, certainly. So my family bought the house in 1606. My ancestor was a chap called Roland Berkeley who made his money in the cloth trade around Worcester and bought Spetchley in 1606. And over the various generations, they've added to their holding, increased the size of the estate. But more importantly, I suppose, is the history of the house. So the original house was a Tudor house, which was moated. And during the Civil War, the then owner, Roland's son, Robert, who was a judge, was imprisoned. So he supported the king and the king's demand for ship money. And so as a result, he was imprisoned with the king in the Tower of London. And on the eve of the Battle of Worcester, his house was requisitioned, actually burnt down. The family had to pay, I think it was £20,000, which in those days is a lot of money, to have him released. And when he came back, he found that his house was a pile of ashes. So he moved into what was the old stables. And over the next few generations, they added on to that building until 1811, when his great-grandson, Robert Berkeley, they were all called Robert in those days. I think I was the one to break the mold. He decided that he wanted to build something that was more in keeping with the landscape. So he knocked down the house and built what is now the current Victorian mansion.
And what we have now at Spetchley Park is Spetchley Hall, a Grade 2 star listed building, and also set in very beautiful gardens, Grade 2 star registered gardens, which you described to me as a beautiful Victorian pleasure ground, which I think is the most evocative and brilliant description. And so more recently, to 2017, you inherited the house from your father. Would you like to say a little bit about the decisions that you faced on that?
I think at the time the decision was sort of twofold. It was, do we live here or not? Because very little had been done to it. I think in the previous 100 years, it had electricity put in, but that was about it. So we took on a house that had no square pin plugs. It still had its lead pipework. It had 3 bathrooms and was a very nice collection of furniture. And the decision we had to make was, do we want to live here? Now, ordinarily, you would probably look at it and say that this is a very expensive project. Can we afford to do it? And will it still be the home that we want it to be? And Kate and I, well, it was a fair amount of fear and trepidation before we eventually said, we've got to give it a go. And the simple reason for that was that if we wanted the children to grow up there and loving it, and therefore want to take it on for future generations, then we had to bite the bullet and do the work so that we could create a home that they could then call home.
Absolutely. And if I may interject, when I first really met you and when I first saw the house, was very struck by how very different it was in those days. And I would say there was a flat upstairs at Spetchley, but I would say that it was very much not a family home for a young family. It was, if I may say, it was dark and it was old-fashioned. And I really hear you when you say that it hadn't been touched, that nothing had been done except electricity. So how did you go about transforming it to the family house that it is today?
Again, with a lot of fear and trepidation, actually, because the house had so much clobber in it. That's a very technical term, I know. But it was full of stuff. Every cupboard we opened, as you will have seen when you came, every cupboard you opened had boxes, cigarette boxes full of seeds or Christmas cards dating back God knows how long. And the cellar was absolutely jam-packed with bits of broken furniture or stuff that really hadn't been seen at the light of day for some considerable time. So it was fear and trepidation. And do you know that the biggest fear I had was actually cleaning it out so we could actually get on with the work? And there were several times where, cold towel on the head, how do we go about doing this? And we were very fortunate in that we got a team around us, including you, Clarissa, and Sotheby's, who made our life so much easier. And I think that's the key to a project like this, is bring in the best to help you, because it became a delight in the end. And that's not just saying that with hindsight and looking at the finished results, but we really enjoyed the whole process, even if COVID intervened.
And Henry, in addition to Clarissa, who were the rest of the team? What sort of specialisms did you need?
So first and foremost was getting the right architect and getting an architect who was sympathetic to that period. And luck would have it, a good friend of mine who lived down in Hampshire had his house converted, and he gave us the name of Adam Architecture, based in Winchester. And we went on a beauty parade and got, I think, 6 different architects. And the last one was Adam Architecture and a chap called George Semery Smith. And we clicked very quickly with him. And for me, it's all about the personal touch and that personal relationship. And George A was very much an expert in that period. He then sat down with us and we formed the rest of the team, from the contractors to the quantity surveyors and, of course, the interior designer as well.
Yeah. George happens to be a sort of relatively near neighbour of mine in Winchester, and he did do a big garden project for us. Not that we got a particularly big garden, but it was a big project. And yes, I mean, he's an absolutely outstanding classical architect. So, excellent person to have.
In that process of going through the house to, as you say, empty it and uncover the bones of it, I will never forget seeing the cellar full of broken prams and incredible treasures. As part of that process, quite a lot of treasures were uncovered, weren't they, Henry, including the amazing Chinese wallpaper?
Actually, it's a remarkably cathartic process, clearing out a house, I always think. And yes, you're absolutely right. And I was surprised because I remember David MacDonald running up to me saying, I think you need to come and have a look at this. And bearing in mind that Sotheby's had been looking after the estate for some considerable time, had done a lot of valuations, but hidden away in the back of this cabinet were these 26 rolls, all individual rolls, of amazingly coloured Chinese wallpaper. I mean, it was unbelievable. And actually, my mother, when I quizzed her about it, she had never, in the 50 years she lived there, she'd never seen it. And to see something of such vibrancy, it got everyone's heart racing.
Well, to me, that's completely emblematic of how going through a house and emptying it out and conducting a sale of excess objects can actually be part of honouring the history of the house more than it ever has been honoured. The Chinese wallpaper, tell us what you did with it.
Well, under good instruction or advice, I might add, we decided to put it in a sale because you couldn't put it up itself. The paper was in poor condition. So we got this amazing lady, Anne McDermott, up in Northumberland to copy it. And the original went in the sale. And it was almost as if, I think, the wallpaper was bought for the specific room that we put it in, which was the morning room, because it fitted like a glove. And she recreated the vibrancy, and it is a stunning room to look at.
And now walking into that room, you can't imagine any other decoration than that beautiful Chinese hand-painted wallpaper. And on the subject of wallpaper, something else that really struck me was the imaginative approach that you and Kate had. Tell us about your dark book-lined corridor and what happened with that.
I think I've got to set the scene on that, because when we were children, my older brother Charles and I, the whole family sort of lived in what used to have been the servants' wing. So we had the kitchen, the sitting room and everything down there, but our bedrooms were in the main house. So we used to sort of migrate through the house upstairs, but because the banisters on the main staircase were quite unsafe, and 2 very inquisitive, quite competitive boys would probably come to a lot of damage if they decided to slide down said banisters, we went up the back, which were accessible through a corridor which had a single pendant light and lined on one side with mahogany bookshelves, floor to ceiling, and filled with many, 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 many books. And it was a very dark corridor. And I hated it. And this was the ideal opportunity. And some may say that it was sacrilege to rip out a set of bookshelves that were made in the house. But I was absolutely adamant that had to be a very vibrant corridor, just based on my feelings from a child. And Emma was brilliant and came up with this absolutely wonderful wallpaper. But when we looked into it in more detail, they'd finished producing it. So she decided that we needed another one. Kate said, no, don't like that. I've got an idea. And she came up with this wallpaper that was sort of chevrons, multicolored chevrons. And there was a bit of toing and froing. Emma thought it would clash with the rest of the color theme going through the house. And then eventually acquiesced and said, okay, you can do it provided I get someone to come and hand paint it on. And we said, okay, intriguing, let's go for it. And this wonderful chap from Norfolk, who was a graffiti artist, turned up in his long hair and his tray of spray cans, took a day putting the stencil on. And when you see it, it's quite a lot of work. And then went to town with his spray guns. And the effect has been absolutely fantastic. It is just what we wanted. It's very vibrant. It's a bit off the wall, but it is very special to us. And it completely changed the atmosphere of this corridor. And I think that was the main point we wanted to make, was to create our own home. And to do so, we had to have license. And we gave ourselves quite a lot of license.
I think that changing the energy of Spetchley Park, which is what happened from when I saw it first to then the family house that it is now, the energy has completely changed. And having the courage to bring in a graffiti artist to a house like Spetchley, just absolutely, it's brave, it's bold, and it's fantastic result. And I think that I really noticed the same thing with your approach to the kitchen, which when I first saw that room, there's a series of rooms at the front of the house where you walk through one and then you walk through the other, and it's a sort of an interlinking chain of rooms. In the middle used to be the old dining room, which was painted a dark green and had a huge oil painting, which was still life. And the energy was very, very serious. Henry, what happened with that?
When we first decided to take on the project, we had several caveats. One, that it was to be affordable. And the second one was that we were to move the kitchen back from where it was down in the old servants' wing up into the middle of the house. Because all my life, I'd watched my mother, who would cook down in that kitchen, and meanwhile, in the main part of the house, there was a party going on, etc. And she was miles away, and it can't have been particularly happy for her. And the kitchen nowadays is the centre of the house. And the point we made to George was, look, you have to make this work. If we can, this is a make or break for us. And George originally wanted to stay with the sort of state of the house being very much of that period. But we persuaded him that try and bring it up. And he did. And it was the most contentious point, probably, of the whole project, was putting a modern kitchen in what was one of the main reception rooms, the dining room, and making it work. And his whole reason for doing it was so well articulated to the planners that the consent was just rubber stamped, and we had no interference from outside organisations. And that was purely down to the attention to detail and his expertise in that period. It was brilliant. And it just goes back. It's all about having the right team around you.
How were relations with the conservation officer of the local authority, and I suspect were Historic England and the Georgian group and Victorian Society interested and involved?
So I'll just take you back a few more years prior to this, when we wanted to do some work to some of the windows. The windows were falling to pieces. They faced the big sash wooden windows, and they had been, over the years, battered by the weather and were in a very poor state of disrepair. So we wanted to do some work to them. And we had the conservation officer, she brought along Heritage England, and they wouldn't let us do anything other than repair what was there. And there was quite a big falling out. over it to the extent that we had to abruptly stop the meeting and just go our separate ways and realise that we weren't going to get our way. But that was just us with the conservation officer and the planning officer. So I mentioned this to George, and he was utterly brilliant in the case that he put forward. And, he did such a good application that none of the stakeholders, Georgian Society, Heritage England, etc., interfered. He didn't even have any questions to ask. Again, it just goes back to getting the right person. And without him, we'd have hit a few more barriers than we did.
Well, I think I can safely say that all in all, it has been completely transformed, Spetchley, into a really warm and welcoming space. And what's more, with bathrooms. So when I first visited Spetchley, there was a flat upstairs, but the rest of the house, it wasn't what you would call modern living. So how did you go about transforming the upstairs into a comfortable living space?
Again, I mean, Kate and I had our own idea, and we were quite, I suppose, concerned about how we would create enough bathrooms for the bedrooms, because what we wanted to do was future-proof it. And we were in the luxurious position of having a big enough footprint that we could really do what we wanted and try and create amount of bedrooms with corresponding bathrooms. It was only trying to understand how to make the building sort of stretch to accommodate that. And this is where George, again, was so good. And we had to sacrifice a couple of really nice bedrooms to do that. But actually, I think that the end result has been very worthwhile. And again, instrumental in having someone who understood the period, who could just say, look, I think we can borrow a corner of this room, or actually that room doesn't really have the gravitas of the others, and I think it would make a really nice bathroom, because I don't like dark bathrooms. We had to incorporate 2 bathrooms into a room, but they've made it work very well.
And there were other parts to the process as well. It was not just about putting the kitchen in the heart of the family home, and not also just about modernising the house in terms of adding bathrooms, but also as part of the process, there was, of course, the sale. And as part of the sale, part of the planning of that was that there would be offers in lieu of tax. And so, of course, there were some objects that had really been hidden from public view previously, which are now permanently in public collections, including the amazing Spetchley bindings, which are now at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and the Wilmot manuscript, which is at the Bodleian. Did you find that that was an emotionally satisfying part of the process as well?
Absolutely. I think I'm not going to discuss finances here, but needless to say, estates as they were are usually asset rich and cash poor. That's certainly the case at Spetchley. And I think if I was to going to create a family home, I needed to raise enough capital to be able to do that. And it did mean that we'd have to make a couple of sacrifices. The sale was one of them, and tax, something you are only too familiar with, Clarissa, played a big part in that. And we were very, very fortunate in that the sale that Sotheby's did was hugely successful, but it left us with quite a large tax bill. And we had to think of a way of alleviating that. And as you've mentioned, we had the bindings and the musical manuscript, both of which were of national importance, but they were just sitting in a cellar. They'd never been seen. I mean, to be honest, I had never seen them until Sotheby's came and went through the strong room. I'd never seen them. And I'm one of those people who, if you've got something, use it, or at least show it. I don't see any reason to have it hidden away. And if it meant that these 2, I'd say valuable but important items could be there for everyone else to see on display, then why not? And it was very apt that we were able to go down that route and offer them in lieu.
It was a real uncovering of treasures. And what I think is particularly beautiful is that when things like this are uncovered and brought to light and shared with the public, these things mean different things to different people. So now everyone has got the opportunity to look at the beautiful Spetchley bindings. I must say, I also participated in your sale, Henry, because I bought a very tiny thing, which is a huge treasure to me and to my family because it was a little gold real tennis racket, which I gave to my son for his 18th birthday. And the uncovering of treasures, which now are incredibly meaningful to other people, is something that I really feel from this situation. So I'd like to thank you for sharing all of the things that you have shared and congratulate you on the incredible transformation of your home.
Thank you. I think there's one thing. The sale wasn't something we necessarily wanted to go down. I'm acutely aware that collections as we had at Spetchley are rare. And I'd be lying if I said it was a breeze. We did get some criticism for what we were doing. My attitude was very much that if I can keep the core of the collection, which we did, and mainly thanks to Sotheby's advice, if we could keep the core of that collection and sell other things that would allow us to keep a house of Spetchley standing, then it was a risk worth taking. But I think I've seen it before and I've heard a lot of criticism of other similar sales. But my attitude has always been that we are slowly getting rid of a lot of our heritage. And it is really important that we keep as much of it as we can.
And well, the gardens, of course, are open to the public, so we're all welcome to come and enjoy them.
The gardens are open to the public, and we were very fortunate. My great-grandmother was a very good garden designer, but her sister is the better known of the two, a woman called Ellen Wilmot. She was a plantswoman who won the Victorian Medal of Honour, and it was thanks to her and her sister Rose, my great-grandmother, that the garden is what it is today. But it's a garden based on a footprint that would have had 20 or 30 gardeners in it. And we have 4, plus a very brilliant load of volunteers who keep it going. And it is beautiful. I don't have many green fingers, I have to admit, but I'm lucky again. Comes back to having a really good team around you, and that's what I've got. But the garden is a jewel, and it's the house itself, as you've seen, Clarissa, and the setting it is in, that is to be treasured.
I think what you've set out is the way in which you turned a house which, by the sounds of it, just wasn't really being used properly as a family home back into a family home. And the fact that to do so does mean quite often making some changes as to how it operates and so on because of the way in which we live today. But thank you so much for taking us through that.
Thanks so much, Henry. That's fascinating.
It's an absolute pleasure. As I said, it was a fantastic project, one I could bang on about ad infinitum, but it's now done. I think we've created what we wanted to create, and hopefully, fingers crossed, future generations will enjoy it.
Thank you for listening to the Art and Heritage Law Contested Heritage. Please do follow or subscribe on Apple or Spotify podcasts to enjoy more shows.
We have a new podcast out every fortnight. If you're able, please take the time to rate us and put down a review.
The show is also on the 39 Essex Chambers website, along with podcast series on topics such as artificial intelligence, climate change and planning.